Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are going to wait about 2 more minutes before we get started here. We're expecting quite a few more people to get joined in. So we'll give them about 2 minutes to get logged in. So we'll get started with the training at 11:02. Thanks. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started with the training today. The training itself is going to be very short. It should take anywhere between 15, 25 minutes. Then the rest of that time we'll use to answer some questions that we have in the chat box. I do have an individual or individuals that will be assisting me with the questions during the presentation. So if we don't answer that question in the inbox, then we'll get to it at the end of the presentation. Last time we had well over 200 questions. We are going to prioritize the vehicle transfer notification questions. And then if we have um, time after that, then we'll answer some more questions. But we do have a lot of attendees in here, and like I said, mentioned, we do get anywhere between 200 to 500 questions, so it's a lot to go through. But today's training is on vehicle transfer notifications, and we'll refer to it as VTNs for short. This training will walk you through the ins and outs, the ups and downs of vehicle transfer notifications. So just how it reads here. We'll go through all of these W's, and then we'll show you how to submit a VTN. So I'll actually go into ePlate and submit a VTN so that you guys can see what that looks like. So let's get into some of the housekeeping here. In the top right of the GoTo platform, there is going to be a Handouts tab. You're looking for that paper and paperclip icon. In there, there's going to be 3 different files in there. We are going to have this presentation in PDF format, and that's also going to include the live VTN submission. So it'll be screenshots of every step that we take. Then we have this RTS 25.3 Web Dealer Addendum file here. This is a great document if you haven't opened this up yet. These are changes made to the systems that went to effect July 1. So there's also going to be some VTN information here, along with other changes that got made for that July 1 implementation day. Then finally, there's going to be the Regional Service Center contact list here. It's going to have the regional service centers, their phone numbers. So if you need to reach out to them, it'll have all of their information on there as well. Now, again, during this time or at the end, during the questions, get those handouts downloaded. Once we end the webinar, they're going to be no longer available. You can find these two on the website. But again, before the webinar ends, you at least want to have this one downloaded. Now, for the questions, as I had mentioned during the presentation, feel free to ask your questions. There's something that I'm going over that you need clarification on. Get that question in. If we don't answer it during the webinar, then at the end, we'll go over those questions. I do see some people already asking questions, but if you haven't already found it, it's going to be again on the top right icon here. Just looking for that question box here. And you just type in your question, hit send. Now, when it comes to asking your questions, make sure that you write it in one message. If you send it in separate messages, that's going to get broken up, so they're not threaded. So we'll lose, crucial information that we need, to answer your questions better. So keep it in one message so that we can get the whole picture here. Onto the audio settings. That gear icon, if you're having difficulty hearing me, what I suggest doing is going in there, unchecking this box and rechecking it. That tends to fix a lot of the issues. Otherwise, you can log out and rejoin the webinar. Otherwise, if you can't hear us at all, of course you wouldn't be hearing me, but let us know in that question box. Okay, so let's move on to the training itself with the first W here. So what is a VTN? Again, that's the vehicle transfer notification. So to put it simply, a VTN is a required notification to the TXDMV that a vehicle with a Texas record has transferred into your inventory. What else does it do? It's going to protect that previous owner from liability. Another thing is it ensures accountability for plates. So if plates are left on a vehicle, they will either be added to your inventory so that you can reuse, or they will be destroyed depending on that situation. We'll go over that a little bit here. So on to the why. Why do you need to submit a vehicle transfer notification? And that is because it is required by law, which started July 1, 2025, under House Bill 718. So this is going to ensure that vehicle records are accurate and up to date. Again, this protects dealers and customers by properly recording when a vehicle changes hands. This will help prevent confusion, and more specifically, what I think is the most important, it's going to remove that seller liability, specifically for traffic tickets. Tolls is a big one, or other violations tied to that vehicle, right? So with that VTN, essentially, if that previous owner provides that entity, maybe it's a toll service, with that VTN submission receipt that you get, then they won't have to pay it, as long as it's been submitted within 30 days. So that's why it's super important. Those tolls authorities, yeah, they'll come after you. So that's why it's important. On to the who. So who needs to submit a VTN? That is going to be all Texas dealers receiving vehicles with an existing Texas record. And what we mean by Texas record, that vehicle will either be titled and or registered in Texas. So if it has that record, that is when you need to submit that VTN. This applies to vehicles that you get from trade-ins from customers, or if you are purchasing vehicles from either a customer, another dealer, or at auction. So the receiving dealer is always responsible for filling out that VTN. And again, it's only going to be when you're receiving, not when you are selling. Another thing to note is dealers should not submit a VTN for vehicles with an out-of-state title. So if those vehicles are coming from out of state, so Oklahoma, New Mexico, if it has, Oklahoma title, then you don't have to submit a VTN for that vehicle. Much like you don't have to submit a VTN for brand new vehicles. So if it's coming in from the manufacturer and it has that MCO, Again, because it doesn't have that Texas record, you do not have to submit a VTN for those vehicles either. Now, this is probably the most asked question when it comes to VTNs. When do I have to submit a VTN? On here, we have immediately when a vehicle enters your inventory, but that really is going to be as soon as possible. So what that looks like for your business might look a little bit different, right? So some examples of what I mean. So same day when you take in a trade-in, same day when you purchase from a customer, dealer, or auction. Again, when we mentioning the time, filling it out, promptly or as soon as possible avoids delays or any compliance issues. So again, you kind of have to take a step back and determine, when you're going to submit those VTNs. It does need to be within 30 days to protect that previous owner from liability. So again, take that back and determine your business practice. But what we suggest is, again, doing it as soon as possible. But again, within 30 days to protect that previous owner. Now, where do you submit a VTN? That is going to be through ePlate. And once you get into ePlate, you could be going into that plates drop down, and then you'll be selecting that vehicle transfer notification option. So we're going to actually go in here and show you how to submit one so we can look at that a little bit more in depth here. So let me switch over. Give me one sec. All right. So now we are on the login page for the web dealer portal. We're going to accept that security message there. Then we're logging into, again, the web dealer portal here. You're going to be using your existing e-tag, e-plates, or web dealer credentials, right? That's all the same here. So let's go ahead and get logged in. From there, you're going to choose that second icon. This is going to be for e-plates. So let's jump in there. You guys should be familiar with this screen, but if you're not, one of the most important things that we suggest doing or getting familiar with is setting this location here, because depending on where you're receiving that vehicle to, you want to make sure that that is the correct location that you're using. And why I say that is if you do take in plates on that trade-in or that purchased vehicle, then those plates are going to go to that location's inventory. So that's why it's very important that you're using that proper location. So I'm going to go ahead and set this location for myself really quick. Now let's go into the VTN submission. So from the plates drop down, again, we're going to go to the vehicle transfer notification and select that. And again, you're doing this every time a vehicle enters your inventory, whether that's going to be from a customer, dealer, or auction. If it's coming into your inventory with that Texas record, a VTN needs to be submitted. So to search for that record, there's going to be essentially two different ways that you can locate it. You can use the plate number, the last four of the VIN, and then search by their name, or you can search by the full VIN and then that owner name here. So when it comes to the name, there's going to be two here. In the name one, that is going to be the full name of that owner. If that vehicle had two owners, that is when you would put that second owner's full name on that second line. So we do get a lot of confusion that people will put their first name here and the last name here, but the full name, if it only has one owner, will go on this line here. So let me grab my plate here. So I have four, the last four of the VIN, 3, and then the name, Okay, and again, you want to make sure that however that record reads on that title, that is how you are searching for that owner here. So I did want to show you really quick an error that you might see. So you might have gotten this, "We're sorry, but you cannot find the record" message. This lets you know that you need to go back and look at that record, make sure that you put the name in correctly, and get that fixed. Or what I strongly suggest doing, because it could be an issue with the plate, you never know where those plates come from. Maybe that customer just put a plate on that vehicle that's not necessarily theirs. So what I, again, strongly suggest doing is searching by the VUL VIN in the event that maybe that plate doesn't belong to that customer. So I'm going to go in here. I did also check the name one more time. I was missing an A. This owner just happened to only have one name, but again, you want to make sure that you're entering that full name, how it reads on the record. It could be as little as adding a space to locate that record. Another thing could be if that record has junior on there, sometimes it's going to be either be abbreviated or spelled out. So you just want to try those different variations to locate that record because that could be the issue. So let's go ahead and search that now. Now on here, we did pull up that vehicle record. Again, we don't have any error message being shown. It's going to provide us with that vehicle information that we're just going to verify. Anything with that red asterisk, you want to make sure that that's filled out and correct. But again, most of this will get carried over from that record. So we do have that plate in that I put in earlier. And again, my issue was that I didn't spell that customer's name right. And then everything else looks good. If you need to change anything on here, you could do so. So we'll continue on by hitting next here. Now we're going to fill out the seller information. So when it comes to the seller information, think of this as who you are obtaining that vehicle from. So for this example, I did receive it from a customer, but if you did receive it from an auction or another dealer, that is where you're going to enter in their information here. And then we'll show you what that looks like as far as how to mark it. But today's example, we are going to choose, we received it from a customer. So let me add that individual's name again, their address. Okay, we're going to go with El Paso, Texas, 24, email address and phone number. So on here, before I continue on, I did want to point out two things before moving on. So the first thing is this email address. If you enter in that individual that you got this vehicles from email, then they will receive an email notifying that you submitted that VTN for them. Again, that's just a good thing for that customer to have, so that in the event that they receive a toll bill after they've given the vehicle to you all and the plates to you all, they're not held liable to pay that toll, right? So there's something to think about. I know some customers might not want to give their email, but just another thing that you could add to your service here. Now, another thing we do get questions frequently is repossessions. So if you repossess a vehicle, then again, think of this as who you obtained that vehicle from. So who you repossessed that vehicle from is, the information that you're going to enter in for the seller information. So just another thing to think about as you're filling this out here, okay? Again, think of seller information as who you obtained the vehicle from. Now let's continue on to the transfer details here. So the transfer details, when you got that vehicle in, whether you purchased it or it was traded in, we'll go ahead and just choose today's date. Now from there, we are going to determine the plates. So this question is going to be, how did you acquire the vehicle? Your options are trade-in, so purchase from an original title owner, or auction, or from a dealer assignment. So we'll go through the auction and dealer assignment really quick, but we are going to choose this one because we did get it in from a customer. So for auction and dealer reassignments, you're going to have the same options as far as the additional fields that pop up. So the first question, did you receive plates? You're either going to choose yes or no. As we all know, more than likely you're not going to receive plates from auction. You shouldn't receive plates from auction, but in the event that you do, you would mark yes, and then it's going to ask an additional question, were those plates damaged? So if it has, two good plates, then you can mark that they were not for damage. Then with that, those plates are going to get added into your inventory so that you can reuse on your next sale. It doesn't need to be to the same vehicle. It doesn't need to be to the same customer. With this, that plate gets added so that we can reuse. It's just going to go to a vehicle of the same classification. And what I mean by classification is, you're not going to put a passenger truck plate on a trailer, a motorcycle, a moped, whatever it might be, or if that vehicle is going to receive a portion plates, combination plates, right? So you're not going to add that general issue um, truck plate on there. So another example would be, if you took in an Escalade and you sell a Elantra, you can still use that same plate, but again, it has to be within 10 days. If it's not used within 10 days, those plates will automatically fall off your inventory, and then you just need to destroy those plates. To destroy them, you're just cutting them up with some metal shears, taking them into a metal recycler or to an RSC. But let's kind of retrack here. If the plates were damaged, of course, you're just going to make sure that those are properly destroyed. If you didn't receive plates at all, you don't have to worry about plates at all, right? You'll just continue on with the VTN submission. No plates are going to get added to your inventory. Same thing applies if you received it from a dealer. You're either going to determine if it came with plates or not, if they were damaged, and this will determine if those plates get added into your inventory, okay? But let's go back to the trade-in purchase from original title owner. Now, before I continue on, another thing that we pointed out right when I was talking about the repossession earlier. So for repossessions, you're going to choose this trade-in option here in the event that you repossess the vehicle. But continue on with our example. Again, we received this from a customer. It did come with plates, so we are going to put no, and the plates were not damaged, so this will get added into our inventory. Before I continue on, I did want to make sure for specialty plates, so whether that's a military specialty plate, a disabled veteran plate, or even just disabled plates or custom plates, you're always going to mark that the customer retained those plates. Okay, you'll never receive those plates into your inventory, so you want to always make sure for those specialty plates, custom plates, that you're marking that the owner retained those plates. And that'll still allow you to do a customer supplied plates for the transaction if that customer purchases another vehicle from you. And that's not to be forgotten. You still need to do that VTN submission. Again, if that customer has their own plates, you'll just mark that they retained them. Okay, again, so the owner didn't keep them. They're general issue plates. They were not damaged. So this is going to get added into my inventory. Let's continue on. We are on the vehicle transfer summary page. Now this is the last page to verify everything. So you do have these edit options here. So if anything looks incorrect, you want to go in there and make sure that you get that fixed before submitting that VTN, because if anything is incorrect and you need to void out that VTN, you would need to contact that regional service center or your local regional server center, I should say, to get that voided out. So again, ensure that all of this information is accurate before hitting save. So it looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then with that, it is going to give us this receipt here. So again, this is something very useful to have. I'm going to go ahead and print receipt so you can see what that looks like. So this is just confirming that submission of that vehicle transfer notification. Again, this isn't something that you have to have printed out, but what I strongly suggest doing as a business practice and as a service to your customers is having this printed out and given to them so that in the event that they receive a toll bill, they have this submission confirmation that lets that entity know that that vehicle is no longer in their possession. So that concludes our live walkthrough. I am going to switch back to the presentation really quickly. And we're just going to go over some FAQ really quick and then open it up to some questions. So from our previous webinars and trainings, we did kind of gather some frequently asked questions on vehicle transfer notifications. First one is a VTN required for vehicles registered in the Texas as RPO or registration purposes only? So they are required. Again, anything with that Texas record, whether it was titled and or registered in Texas, you will submit a VTN for that vehicle. Next question, do we need to submit a VTN for vehicles on our lots before July 1? So any older inventory that you had in your inventory prior to July 1, you do not have to submit a VTN for those vehicles. Again, anything that entered in your inventory July 1 and on, you need to have that submission. So again, anything entering your inventory now is when you're submitting those VTNs. Do we submit a VTN when a customer has a specialty plate? That is correct. So regardless if you take in plates or not, if a vehicle is entering your inventory, you need to submit that VTN for them. That should always be the first step. Okay, do we have to submit a VTN for repossessions? I did go over this through the live walkthrough a little bit, but yes, you are going to submit a VTN for those vehicles. Again, you're going to use that trade-in option to do so. Last slide here. What types of vehicles do we need to submit a VTN for? So we just have a small list put together, but trailers to include travel trailers, boat trailers, and so on and so forth. Now we have passenger vehicles, off-highway vehicles, motorcycles, mopeds, buses, and then again, so on and so forth. So this is just some of the examples, but again, this should be every vehicle that has that Texas record, okay? Next question, do I have to submit a VTN when selling a vehicle? So no, you don't have to submit when selling. Again, it's only when you're receiving inventory. So whenever you're selling them, don't even worry about that VTN submission, okay? It's when you're receiving those vehicles. So next question, how will we submit a VTN if we can't do it online? So you still have these two options, and that's going to be at the RSC. You can either mail in your submission or you can do it in person, but those can be done at your local regional service center. Okay, and last question is how do we void a VTN? So this will be necessary to contact your RSC for assistance. So if you submitted a VTN and the information was wrong and that you need to have corrected, you need to contact a regional service center so that you can have that corrected, okay? So that concludes the presentation. We are going to open it up to some questions here. I see quite a few questions. So we'll start from the bottom here. And again, we are going to prioritize VTN questions. If we have any time afterward, we'll get into some other questions here. And as I mentioned, we do have Armando Bazan that is going to assist me here with the questions.
Yes, I am having some people having maybe some problems hearing the webinar. So what kind of fixes, like Frank mentioned through the housekeeping, is you can log out and log back in. That usually fixes the issue, or adjusting the your microphone volume. That also fixes that. So that way you can stay tuned for the Q&A, which is great information for everyone.
All right. Okay, so when are plates supposed to stay on the vehicle? So when it comes to that VTN submission, right, it's going to be up to your customer. So when you fill out that VTN, if that customer decided they, wanted to remove those plates, or maybe that vehicle when they brought it in, it didn't have plates at all, um, then you would just mark that plates were not, or plates remained with the customer. As far as when plates are supposed to stay on the vehicle, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, so maybe if you want to elaborate more on that. Next question. When entering a VTN purchased from auction, we choose auction, and for the seller, we enter the auction's name or name listed on the title. So you're going to need the name on the title to locate that record, but that seller information, because you purchased it from an auction, that is when you're using that auction's information. And then you would just mark that you got it from auction on the third screen.
Next question is from Judy. Her question is this for use vessels? So as far as this only applies to vehicles, not vessels. So like I mentioned, used vessels would be like a boat, personal watercrafts, etc. That is through the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. That would not be through us.
Okay, next question here. Do you have to do vehicle transfers for out of state vehicles? Again, if it's coming from out of state, so if it has an Oklahoma record or Oklahoma title, for example, and it was registered there, then yeah, you don't have to worry about submitting a VTN for those vehicles.
So next question is from Ern from Lake City Jeep. If the VTN date of sale was typed incorrectly, how do we go about going back and editing it? So you can, and like Frank was demonstrating earlier through the walkthrough, once you're on the last page, you do have those icons to make those edits on there, and you can change the date of sale.
Okay, another question here. We buy cars at auction. We are a salvage yard and a dealer, and some vehicles we rebuild for resale. Am I supposed to do a VTN if it has a salvage vehicle? So yeah, that's another question that we get often. If it's coming in with the salvage record or the salvage or a rebuild title, you'll still submit that VTN. Obviously, you're not going to do that transaction in web dealer, but you still need to submit a VTN for those vehicles. Excuse me. Another question that we'll get often, and this is pertaining to vehicles coming in from auction, that you're not, getting that title immediately. Again, you want to get that submitted within 30 days. But if you have a Twix subscription, you can locate, the vehicle record that way. But yeah, you will need to have that information so that you can submit a VTN for it. And sorry, folks, just kind of sifting through the questions here. Try to space out the same questions so we're not just answering the same question over and over.
So next question is from Leon Reed from Bolt Car. Um, his question is stating, is there a reversal process to the VTN in the event of an unwind? Yes, there is. As Frank demonstrated earlier through the beginning of the presentation, if you do need to do that, you would have to reach out to your local regional service center or to our car center to get that unwind.
Another question here. How can we protect ourselves from tolls, etc. on our side if we sell the vehicle to another dealer? Can we perform a VTN being the selling dealer? Right, so the requirement is that that receiving dealer submit a VTN, right? That's, the rule or the law under House Bill 718. But there wouldn't be anything preventing you from submitting a VTN as the selling dealer. So if you wanted to do that as well, you could absolutely do so.
Next question is from Christina Wilcox. Is there going to be a mandatory, or can we still send it in the paper VTN? So it is mandatory for everybody, and this is based on House Bill 718 that is mandated for all dealers to do vehicle transfer notifications when vehicles are entering your inventory. It is mandatory, whether if you wanted to do it through e-plate electronically, which is the fastest way, best way you can do it from your desk, or you can also do it um, by mail, or you can walk it into your local regional service center. But best practice is to do it through e-plate. That way you can have full control of it and you can get it done quicker.
Okay, after 10 days, those tags are going to be destroyed. How do we get them out of our inventory? So after that 10-day mark, those plates will automatically fall off your inventory. So you don't have to go in there and delete anything or remove anything from your inventory. It'll automatically fall off your inventory for you. So another question here, there is no option for obtaining a vehicle from an individual, but not as a trade-in. What option should I enter in that case? So if you're purchasing it from a customer, right? If you're just buying a street off the car or whatever, or a car off the street, you're still going to use that trade-in option because it's going to be coming in from that owner. But yes, you're going to choose the trade-in option if you are purchasing from a customer.
And then just kind of to add more information to that, Um, just kind of be mindful when you are purchasing a vehicle, as Frank demonstrated through the presentation. You gotta to see what is required when you do a vehicle transfer notification. So as you saw, the information of the seller. So now that you know that ahead of time, you might want to gather that information when you're buying a vehicle. So that way, when you come into that screen, you have that information. And the reason I bring this up is the most common thing that I get a lot from dealers is a phone number, an address. So whenever you're buying a vehicle, and just kind of like that question that was just asked, if you're buying it from a person off the street and you bring it into your inventory, you are going to need their information, as Frank demonstrated, their full name, address, and phone number, because those are going to be the requirements when you are going to be filing a VTN.
Okay, next question here. So once we do a VTN, we don't have to go back and print a plate receipt. So plate receipts and plate assignments would be separate from your VTN. So again, VTN should be the first thing or the first step if you are taking in vehicles, and that's just kind of what you're going to do every single time you receive a vehicle into your inventory. And then when you go to sell that vehicle and you're doing a plate assignments, again, think of that separately because that customer is going to need that plate receipts on hand before they receive their registration sticker. Um, I do see a question that I want to address really quick. As far as the training goes, this will get posted onto our YouTube page. Essentially, if you just Google, TXDMV YouTube, or it's in our chat box. If you go into there, there's going to be a link to our page, but we'll get this training posted on there. And there's also a lot of other trainings on there on e-plates, a live process e-plate training in there. So if you haven't watched that and you want to do another VTN training, it does walk you through that again on there. Okay, do we have to do a VTN for a car we are selling back to auction? So again, anytime you're selling a vehicle, you don't have to submit a VTN for them. All right. The retained plates can only be used for our inventory within 30 days. So those plates that you take in from a VTN, you only have 10 days to use them. After 10 days, they'll fall off your inventory. Then you need to make sure that you destroy those plates. Okay. Um, as a follow-up here, for repossessions, should we select that we acquire the unit as trade or dealer reassignment? Again, for repossessions, you're going to choose that trade-in option. Okay, inventory before July 1. Again, don't worry about submitting a VTN for those vehicles. So if it was on your lot before July 1, you don't have to submit a VTN for those vehicles.
Next question is from Lucy Flores. Can we get a number where we can call on issues with web dealer? The number we have is telling us to call our local regional office. So if you're experiencing issues with web dealer system, you can contact us. Our toll-free number is 1-888-368-4689, or our local one is 512-465-3000. And when you do call, please provide as much detail as possible about the issue you're encountering, including any error messages, the specific actions you're trying to perform, and the steps you've already taken to troubleshoot, because this will help the support team assist you more efficiently. But we do have those regional service centers. If you are trying to reach out to them, they are part of our team, and they're there to assist as much as possible as well.
Okay, next question here. If we submit a VTN, how long is it good for? So right when you submit that VTN, it takes between 24 and 48 hours before it reflects onto the record. But yeah, that VTN will be on that record until that title transfer happens, right? So when you submit it, that transaction in Webular for that vehicle, and then it gets approved by the county, then that VTN will get removed. But essentially, that VTN is good for until that title transfer.
Next question is from Guevara from Ram Country. When we void a plate for wrong information, does the plate automatically get placed into the inventory so that we can re-choose the same plate and make the correction, or does it take a while? So initially, once you void it, it should go back into inventory immediately. We have encountered situations from multiple dealers that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that does happen. That is not going into real time. It does take a while, but not in all cases. So you have that option to either assign it a new plate or refresh it or a clear catch on there so that way it can refresh and it can update that plate back into your inventory and it should populate right away.
Follow up on that plates. If you took a plate in on a trade in or from the VTN submission, you're not going to get notified when that plate falls off your inventory. You just won't see it in that drop down any longer. But yeah, you won't get notified for it.
This question's from Andy Turner. Um, his statement is not a question, but a statement. They said, we'd like to know who's they. Um, they cannot process them, as far as I'm assuming. The vehicle transfer notifications, we walk them into the office. Are you referring to the local regional service center or a county tax office? Um, I'm assuming you are talking about our regional service center. You are more than welcome to walk them in or do them by mail. And like Frank was demonstrating, you can do them through ePlate, but that would be um, the best thing to do more efficiently to do them through ePlate. But if sometimes it's not allowed, you can mail them in and walk them in.
Okay, next question. What about for export only sales? How do we notify that that vehicle is no longer in our possession since we don't apply for a title? So this is a great question, right? You're not, again, going to submit a VTN for vehicles leaving your inventory. But as far as the export scenario, you would go into the plate assignment, search for that vehicle, and then you would just mark that it's for export. And that's how you make sure that that reflects in the system.
Next question is from Tammy Halliday. This looks more like it is for streamline for an on-road vehicles. Do you off-road vehicles need to do a VTN also? So it's all motor vehicle dealers. So like Frank demonstrated is that's including trailers, off highway use vehicles. Just kind of keep in mind anything that is titled. We have a record for it. It does have to have a vehicle transfer notification on there. Some examples that I can tell you that do not apply to a VTN is if you are a franchise dealer or you have MCOs, there's not going to be a record of that. It's a brand new vehicle. So that disqualifies it from doing a VTN because there is no record that we have. Another one would be out-of-state titles. Out-of-state titles, we don't have a record of them as well. So those do not apply to all dealers to do VTNs. But just keep in mind if we have registration on it or a title, basically any record in Texas, then you must do a VTN when it's entering your inventory.
Another question, once a VTN is submitted, is there a waiting period before being able to make a sale of that vehicle? So there isn't a waiting period, but it does take, like I mentioned, 24 to 48 hours before that reflects in the system after you've submitted a VTN. But yeah, this would just be a business practice on when you determine that turnaround time. But if you want to sell it, a few days after you submit that VTN, there's no issue, or a couple days, no issue. Okay, and to confirm, yeah, VTNs are for only when vehicles are entering your inventory.
And that's a great point you bring up, Frank. So remember, when it's entering, so if you are selling it, you are not going to do a vehicle transfer notification. It's only when you are receiving it to your inventory that you're buying it, not when you're selling it.
Okay, if purchasing from another dealer on the VTN, do we put the dealer information as a seller? That is correct. So the seller information, again, think of it as who you are obtaining that vehicle from. If it's from another dealership, then you'll put their information in there. Okay, does VTNs apply to repos too? That is correct. Okay, who do we
Next
list
question.
as? Oh, I'm sorry, Armando. Um, Let me just get through this real quick. Sorry. Kind of a
No, go ahead.
piggyback off of entering in that seller information. So if you purchase a vehicle from auction, right, you need to locate that record using the information that was going to be on the record. However, when you're filling out the seller information, again, that's who you obtained that vehicle from. So if you bought it from an auction, you would enter in their information on the seller information.
Next question is from Edward from Brown Auto Group. Um, the question is asking, out-of-state toll services are not accepting the VTN receipts. What do we suggest customers do? So yes, VTN receipts aren't acceptable for out-of-state tolls because they're only a Texas ownership notification. From my experience, use what I recommend using is a temporary the registration receipt. Once it's been submitted through a web dealer and you get that copy, they can use that your customer, or when they finally get their title, um, or it's already been submitted and approved by the county, you can give them also that proof. But yeah, that receipt, that VTN confirmation, most of those toll tags will not accept that.
Okay, next question. If we have imported trailers, do we submit a VTN? No. Much like if they're coming from out of states, if they're coming from out of country with no Texas record, then no, you don't have to submit a VTN for those. Okay, and kind of another follow-up on, um, the VTN and covering liability. Because I do see a question on here. Can I submit a VTN on the web page for faster service? So if I'm an individual and I wanted to protect myself against tickets and tolls, so yeah, that is something that we strongly suggest, especially for private sales. But again, yeah, you as a seller, you could still go on there and submit a VTN for. Again, the requirement is that dealers submit it for receiving inventory, but there's nothing stopping you from still submitting it. As far as when the training will get posted, be on the lookout for it next week. Otherwise, I just strongly suggest getting familiar with our YouTube page and just going to it frequently, maybe once a week, to get notified or to see any trainings that we have posted. We're working on having more trainings posted on there, so just check it regularly. Otherwise, yeah, check with us next week on that page. It should be on there. So another question here: are the toll authorities able to see when a transfer notification was done? So they don't see that transfer notification. That's why it's important, to have that receipt provided to that customer so that customer can present it to that toll road authority. But they're just going to see, who's the name on the record. So if it's still that previous owner, that's why they still receive that toll payments. And Armando, I do see a lot of questions about a phone number that you gave out earlier. You mind giving that one more time before we close out today?
Yeah, absolutely. So that contact information, our toll-free number is 1-888-368-4689, or we have our Austin local is 512-465-3000.
All right, folks, that does conclude our time today. We do appreciate you joining us on your, Friday afternoon here. It is lunchtime. Hope you guys have a good lunch. Be on the lookout on the Gov Delivery for any future trainings that we have. Or again, um, check our YouTube frequently, see if any, more trainings get posted there. Again, thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.